First of all, it's wonderful to see so many people here and also everybody online as well. And it's really an important occasion. We come together for one single purpose. All of us here in this very troubled world think there are ways of doing things better, that we don't actually have to have this conflict, we don't have to have the bloodshed, the terror, the starvation, and there are ways of doing that better. And frankly, that is an aspiration in the whole world as well. It's just that people don't know how to go about doing it. And one of the things that we try to concentrate on is finding ways of doing that and promulgating that, sending that message to people. There is a better way, and there is a journey through which you can go to get to that nirvana, to get to that special land. Well, anyway, Robin has asked me to speak about the global vision for the UK, which is going to be difficult in just a few minutes, which is all I've got. But let me say this, the global role and influence of the UK has changed immeasurably over the last 80 years. That's just one generation, and more than of any other comparable country. In 1944, we and our allies were on the brink of winning the Second World War and still possessed an empire, the largest of any colonial power in history, on which the sun never set. It was the result of British dominance of the seas and a sense of adventurism akin to other colonial powers, but unlike them, was based on trade and did not seek to impose an alien religion or social practice and other customs on the established ones that were there. And maybe that is why it lasted for so long. It's a key to its longevity. But in these days of woke reinterpretation of history, I commend you Sir Neil Ferguson's book, Empire, How Britain Made the Modern World. Yes, colonialism was exploitative, often marred by the slave trade and had unpleasant effects. But a more lasting legacy is the voluntary association of former colonies in the Commonwealth. And we should remember that 15 of those Commonwealth countries still retain the British monarchy as their head of state. And also, on top of that, the systems of democracy and bureaucracy based on the separation of powers, as well as the export of engineering, the railways, and other aspects of British life. But under the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919 at the conclusion of the First World War, the empire reached its greatest extent with the addition of 1.8 million square miles and 13 million new subjects. Perhaps, though, through arrogance and self-satisfaction, as well as political mishandling, the American colonies were lost in 1783, and the same maladroit refusal to adapt or appreciate alternative aspirations led to the loss of Ireland between the wars, as well as rumblings in other parts of the empire, such as Egypt and India. I mentioned 1944 as the zenith, but the Second World War left Britain essentially bankrupt, with insolvency only averted in 1946 after the negotiation of a $3.75 billion loan from the United States. Within 5 years, India had gained independence and the British mandate for Palestine was terminated. In 1956, the Suez Crisis diminished Britain's reputation and influence even further. Malaya was given independence in 1957, and in the 1960s came the wind of change. Britain's remaining colonies in Africa, except for self-governing Southern Rhodesia, as it then was, were all granted independence by 1968. Well, in 1962, and you've probably heard this many times before, Dean Acheson, the Secretary of State under the Truman administration, claimed that Great Britain had lost an empire but had not yet found a role. And arguably, that is still true today. So, what is the role? Well, the Prime Minister, only this week at the Mansion House, asserted that it is not in the national interest to choose between our closest ally, the USA, and Europe, and that we need both. Achieving that, however, may be more difficult if the so-called special relationship, which I think exists more in aspiration than in reality, is put under strain through tariff barriers or bullying tactics. What is the legacy which also points to what influence the UK can exert in this now much changed multipolar world? The widespread use of English, albeit heavily nuanced by America, democracy, although now inferior here in many respects to other more sophisticated and advanced democratic systems, they're obvious, as is the rule of law, in which government ministers here can be found wanting in the courts, as well, of course, as a comparative but significant lack of corruption and ability to cling to power. Despite recent threats to it, there remains a freedom of expression and lack of interference in private life by government, and agencies, as well as the government itself, that is the envy of many others. We decided some time ago against ID cards and the extra authoritative powers that often accompany them. Then there is that often ill-defined soft power of a sense of tolerance, impartiality, due consideration before action, and of fair play, as well as the famous British sang-froid. We are resilient, and it takes much to rouse us, whereas even as close as the continent of which we are a part, angered people take to the barricades at seemingly little comparative provocation. These are the secrets to Britain's role: the ability to broker difficult situations with a sense of impartiality and of understanding that the durability of arrangements comes from both sides feeling that something has been gained rather than winner takes all, giving rise to lasting, seething resentment. The Treaty of Versailles, which I mentioned, and others should certainly teach us the unfortunate legacy of what happens if we do not adopt that more comparative view. It's important that, being small, the UK really comes to mind that it is small and recognises that, and we also make sure that we carry influence in the world. Now, we carry a reputation and an ability to find solutions which may evade others. Unlike others, though, we do not bemoan the loss of empire. We live with it without trying to recreate it through main force. So I feel that we are essentially a people at ease with itself. And even though now we know there are many, many tensions in modern life, we are probably one of the last countries to be regarded as ripe for revolution. Perhaps it is anomalous, but as a member of the Permanent Five in the UN Security Council, we treat our position responsibly. Indeed, we've supported a limitation on the use or threatened use of the veto. After the bloodiest half-century in history, international norms for behaviour and peaceful coexistence were laid down in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the European Convention on Human Rights, more recently, the Universal Islamic Declaration of Human Rights, and other instruments which established the individual dignity of every human being. We must not only live by those norms, but ensure that all are aware of their rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Just explaining these to people who are unaware of them and are oppressed can bring some comfort. As part authors of many of these, in the UK, we have an especial responsibility to uphold them. We cannot do that on our own, but must seek alliances of the willing in this multipolar world. As I mentioned, our Prime Minister has recently rejected the idea that we might have to choose between our relationship with America and our continental neighbours, but that we need both. Well, I hope he's right, but any such principle should not deter us from speaking out in support of those freedoms where they are threatened or ignored wherever that may be. Now, these tenets that I've just mentioned should also guide us in UPF. Our historic knowledge and involvement in so many parts of the world, our own multicultural, multilingual and multi-religious society, often drawn from those parts of former empire, enable us to act as broker in areas where others might justifiably fear to tread, especially where we have had historic involvement, which means a great deal of the world. This is fundamental to our charitable objects, to seek peaceful solutions in cases of conflict, both domestically and overseas. We can bring people together with them knowing that we have some understanding of their position. We can and should exemplify that through a sense of fair play and of assisting those in need, which have personified the nobler aims of that involvement rather than the baser ones of exploitation and self-enrichment. The British journey through global history has been tortuous and at times very disruptive. But in these days, when we acknowledge the evil of slavery and question the many areas of our heritage which benefited financially from that abomination, we should also recognise the pivotal role played by the pioneers and legislators who were in the vanguard of abolishing it as legitimate. Let us not cover ourselves too much in sackcloth and ashes and recrimination, but instead resolve to carry forward the concept of internationalism. That means not just helping the poorer parts of the world, but calling out modern slavery and condemning tyranny wherever it is found, rather than turning a blind eye. We know that migration is a feature of the modern world, and that merely pulling up the drawbridges of our border fortresses or seeking to stem the flow in the manner of King Canute will not resolve the matter, but that reducing conflict and corruption, improving living conditions and the standard of living and job opportunities in those countries which generate the flight of their people will ensure that fewer wish to escape their present surroundings in the first place. In short, we need to break out of our narrow national parochialism and realise that humanity is one family under God, and that how we treat others different from ourselves is the true measure of our civilization. Thank you very much.